On a peaceful boat trip, a surprise helicopter attack turns Keanu and Sandra's getaway into a brutal fight for survival. Forced to outsmart missiles, exploding waves, and a hidden enemy, they uncover a shocking conspiracy that makes their own deaths the least explosive part of the story. Keanu kept saying it was just a quick escape, a quiet afternoon on the water so they could finally breathe. Sandra laughed, rolled her eyes, and told him he didn't know the meaning of quiet anymore. But she still stepped into the boat, still trusted him with the wheel and with the part of her heart that had never really stopped belonging to him. The sun was bright and low, painting the waves in gold as the boat cut through the water. Keanu's hair was still damp from the salt spray, his T-shirt clinging to his shoulders, and Sandra watched him with that amused softness that comes when you've seen someone at their highest and their lowest. They weren't together, not officially, not in the way magazines used to scream about, but there was something between them that hadn't faded with age or distance. It was quieter now, deeper, like a fire that had burned long enough to know it didn't need to prove anything. "You know," Sandra said, leaning back in her seat, "most people relax by actually relaxing, not by driving a tiny boat into the middle of nowhere with a man who attracts chaos like it's part of his job description." Keanu smirked, eyes on the horizon. "Chaos retired," he said. "We made a deal. Today is just about water, wind, and pretending the world doesn't know our names." His voice was calm, but there was a tiredness underneath it, the kind that comes from too many years of pretending to be strong for everyone else. Fame, expectations, the pressure to always be on, it had carved quiet lines into his face. Out here, away from cameras and questions, he let those lines show. Sandra studied him for a moment. "You really needed this, huh?" she asked, softer now. He didn't answer right away, and in that silence she realized just how long it had been since anyone had asked what he needed instead of what he could give. There was always another movie, another charity event, another late-night call from someone who needed help. He was kind by instinct, generous to a fault, and it left him emptied more often than he would admit. "Yeah," he said finally, "I did, and I needed you here too." That sentence landed between them like an anchor. She smiled, but it was a little shaky. Their friendship had walked a tightrope for years, too much chemistry for simple friendship, too much respect to risk ruining it. They had chosen kindness over ego, staying in each other's orbit without demanding more. Yet on that boat, with no one watching, it felt like the universe had paused just long enough for them to ask, what if? Before Sandra could answer, a distant sound cut across the water, faint at first, like a far-off engine. She frowned, glancing over her shoulder. The ocean was almost empty, just a lonely stretch of blue and white foam. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Keanu twisted slightly, listening. The noise grew louder, sharper, no longer a hum but a heavy mechanical thrum that vibrated in their chests. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. It didn't sound like another boat. It sounded heavier, angrier. A dark shape broke over the distant horizon, small at first, then growing fast. The rhythmic chop of blades hit the air, slicing through the peaceful afternoon like a warning. A helicopter coming in low and fast, heading straight toward them. No visible markings, no reason to be out here, no logic that made sense. "That's weird," Sandra murmured, her voice losing its playful edge. "We're in restricted waters or something." "We're not," Keanu said quietly. His instincts, honed from years of stunt work and the real-world chaos that sometimes followed fame, kicked in. This wasn't tourism. This wasn't coincidence. He eased off the throttle, then thought better of it and pushed it forward again, heart beating hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. "Hold on." The helicopter roared closer, the wind from its rotors skimming the surface of the water in violent ripples. Sandra's hand went to the metal railing, knuckles whitening as the sound became almost unbearable. She squinted up, trying to see inside the cockpit, but the sun bounced off the glass, blinding her. "Keanu, why is it not changing direction?" she asked, her voice now edged with genuine fear. "Why is it coming straight for us?" He didn't answer. The question stuck inside him, twisted into something darker. Sometimes when you live a life in the spotlight, you collect strangers. Some who love you, some who resent you, some who build their entire reality around you. A chill crept down his spine as the helicopter dipped even lower, sending spray bursting up around the boat. Suddenly, a flash of light streaked from the side of the chopper. For a split second, Keanu's mind refused to name it. It was too insane, too impossible for their simple escape day. But his body recognized danger before his brain did. "Get down," he shouted, lunging toward Sandra. The sky exploded behind them with a thunderous roar, a missile slamming into the water meters away, flinging the boat sideways in a violent, chaotic surge. Sandra's scream tore out of her as she grabbed onto Keanu, the world spinning in a sun-streaked blur of water, fire, and metal. When the boat slammed back onto the waves, half-tilted and shuddering, Keanu dragged himself upright, chest heaving. The smell of burning fuel and salt filled his lungs. He turned, eyes wide, to see Sandra clinging to the seat, soaked, trembling, but alive. Relief hit him like a punch, but it lasted less than a heartbeat. The helicopter wasn't leaving. It was circling back, faster now, the angle of its nose unmistakable. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a warning shot. Someone somewhere had decided that their peaceful little boat trip needed to end in fire. Keanu placed a hand on Sandra's shoulder, his voice low but steady, fighting his own panic. "Listen to me," he said, locking eyes with her. "I don't know who they are or why they're doing this, but I promise you I am not going to let us die out here." She stared at him, chest rising and falling, eyes shining with a mix of terror and trust. For years, she joked that if the world ever went insane, he'd be the one person she'd want next to her. Now the world had decided to test that theory in the most brutal way possible. Another flash of light sparked from the helicopter. Keanu grabbed the wheel with one hand and Sandra's arm with the other, yanking the boat into a sharp, desperate turn as the missile streaked toward them. And in that blinding, deafening instant, with death racing across the sky, Sandra suddenly remembered the one secret she had been keeping from Keanu all these years. The one truth that could change everything between them, if they somehow survived the next 3 seconds. Fire on the water. She had always meant to tell him when things were calm, when life felt safe and ordinary. But nothing about this moment was calm. The missile sliced the air toward them, a burning streak of metal and rage. Keanu yanked the wheel hard, the boat leaning so violently that water flooded over the side, drenching them both. The missile slammed into the spot where they had been a heartbeat before, erupting in a wall of fire and steam that rose like the ocean was swallowing the sun. The force of the blast hurled them forward. Sandra's shoulder slammed into the console, pain shooting down her arm. Something cracked, and for a second white stars burst behind her eyes. She gasped, trying to suck air into lungs filled with smoke and salt. Keanu's arm shot out, bracing her, his fingers digging into her good shoulder so hard it almost hurt. He was shaking too, but his eyes were sharp, alive, focused in a way she had seen only in the worst, most dangerous scenes on set. Except this time, no one could yell, "Cut." "Sandy, look at me," he said, voice rough. "Can you move your arm?" She tried to lift it and winced. "Yeah, not well, but yeah." Her laugh sounded thin, almost hysterical. "Please tell me this is some messed up prank show." He didn't even pretend to smile. Above them, the helicopter swung into another pass. The sky felt small now, like a ceiling closing in. Keanu's mind raced through impossible questions. Who would do this? Why them? Was this about money, revenge, politics, some delusional fan trying to make a statement? It didn't matter. Right now, the only truth that mattered was brutally simple. They were trapped on open water with nowhere to hide, and someone up there wanted them gone. He scanned the horizon. No land, no other boats, just endless blue and the dull smear of smoke rising from the burning patch of sea behind them. Fear rose in his chest like a wave, but he forced it down. Fear was allowed, panic was not. Panic got people killed. "We have to head for the rocks," he said, spotting a jagged outline far in the distance, half lost in haze. "We get close enough, that pilot will have to think twice before firing again. He misses once, he hits the cliffs instead." Sandra squinted where he pointed, her heart sinking. "Those cliffs look like the teeth of a sea monster, but sure, let's go flirt with death from a new angle." "Trust me," he murmured, shoving the throttle forward. She did, she always had. That was the terrifying part. The engine screamed as the boat shot forward, bouncing hard over the chop left by the explosions. Spray battered their faces like needles. Sandra wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand, realization settling in with icy clarity. This might be the last day of her life. Not on a set, not in some heroic scripted ending. Just here, on a sunlit afternoon that had started with jokes and ended with fire. The helicopter tilted, chasing them. From below, the machine looked like a metal predator, its shadow skimming the surface. Keanu zigzagged the boat, forcing the pilot to constantly adjust. It bought them seconds, only seconds, but sometimes seconds were the only difference between life and death. "Keanu," she said suddenly, voice shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with the explosions. "If we don't make it to those rocks, there's something I need to—" Another shriek cut the air. This time it wasn't a missile. It was the sharp, punishing rattle of gunfire. Bullets tore into the water around them, snapping the surface like angry fists. One ripped into the metal railing inches from Sandra's hand, sending shards flying. She ducked instinctively as Keanu threw his body between her and the incoming fire, shielding her without thinking. "Down!" he yelled, forcing her lower as he bent over the wheel. The boat swerved, engine protesting, hull creaking with every brutal impact against the waves. Time fractured into fragments. The burning sky, the taste of salt and fear, the sound of metal shrieking as another bullet ripped past. Sandra's world shrank to the rough feel of his T-shirt under her fingers as she grabbed his waist to stay upright, the pounding of his heart against her cheek when she pressed closer to keep low. "Why are they doing this?" she whispered, voice breaking. "We've never hurt anyone." He didn't know how to answer that. Kindness had been his quiet rebellion against a cruel world, and hers too. They had given, donated, showed up, held hands with strangers in hospitals, paid rent for crew members who'd fallen on hard times. They had tried, in their imperfect human way, to be good. And still, somewhere out there, someone had chosen them as targets. It was a brutal reminder. The world doesn't always reward kindness. Sometimes it punishes it. The test is whether you stay kind anyway. "We're not going to give them the ending they want," he said, jaw tight. "Not today." The cliffs grew larger with every second, jagged gray teeth rising from the water, streaked with white where waves had bitten at them for centuries. The space between rock and sea narrowed into a dangerous corridor, just wide enough for a desperate boat and a reckless pilot. Keanu adjusted his grip, calculating angles in his head. If he got close enough, the helicopter would have to pull up or risk smashing into stone. If the pilot was ruthless enough, he might fire again anyway, blowing them both to pieces against the cliff. He glanced at Sandra. There was a smear of soot on her cheek, her hair whipped wild by the wind. Her eyes were bright, furious, alive. He remembered the first time they'd worked together, how easily she'd laughed then, how fearless she'd seemed. Over the years, he had watched her learn to hide her pain, to carry heartbreak with a kind of quiet grace. There was so much he'd never told her, so many times he'd wanted to say, "You're stronger than you know. You saved me more times than you think." "Hang on," he said. "This is going to be close." She swallowed hard, fingers tightening on his arm. "You still owe me an explanation for why you've dragged another helicopter into my life, by the way." Despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. That was Sandra, joking with one foot in the grave, still finding something ridiculous to hold onto. It reminded him that humor was a kind of courage too, the ability to look terror in the face and still find a reason to laugh. The helicopter swooped in behind them, lowering, lining up for another shot as they raced toward the rocks. The roar of rotors mixed with the crash of waves and the hammering of their hearts. As the first shadow of the cliff fell over the boat, cooling the air, Keanu realized he had a brutal decision to make. Cut speed and try to tuck them into a narrow cove where they might hide, or push full throttle into a treacherous passage between two towering rock walls, praying the engine didn't fail and the pilot didn't follow. He had seconds to decide. Sandra's eyes met his, searching, trusting, silently asking the same terrified question he was asking himself. And just as he opened his mouth to tell her what he was going to do, the engine coughed once, sputtered, and then began to die. Between stone and sky, for one horrifying heartbeat, the only sound was the choking rattle of the engine. The boat lurched, speed bleeding away as if someone had grabbed it from beneath. The sudden loss of power almost pitched Sandra forward. She caught herself on the console, biting back a cry as pain burned through her injured shoulder. "No, no, no," Keanu muttered, slamming the throttle forward and back. The engine gurgled like it was drowning, then fell into a miserable, uneven idle. They were still moving, but not fast enough, not for what was coming. The cliffs towered over them now, massive walls of rock carved by time and storms. Seabirds screamed overhead, circling in chaotic arcs as if even nature sensed that something was terribly wrong here. The water darkened to a deep, unsettling blue, the surface broken by jagged outcroppings just beneath. This close, the sea no longer looked gentle. It looked ancient and merciless. The helicopter's shadow swept over them again. Sandra looked up and finally saw the pilot's face through the glass, a blurred outline hidden by helmet and glare. No insignia, no uniform she recognized, just a dark, anonymous shape guiding death through the sky. The sight chilled her in a way the explosions hadn't. It's one thing to be attacked. It's another to realize that to someone else, your life is just a target on a screen. "We're not going to outrun them," she said quietly, the truth landing like a weight in her chest. "No," Keanu agreed, "we're not." He let that honesty hang between them for a moment, then something shifted in his eyes. Resignation hardened into resolve. He had faced loss before, of friends, of family, of dreams that never came true. Every time he had chosen to keep going for the people who were still here. Today, that person was sitting inches away, bruised, terrified, and still somehow ready to make jokes about their odds. He killed the throttle completely. The boat slowed, drifting. The helicopter adjusted, circling, confused for a split second by the sudden change. Sandra stared at Keanu, incredulous. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "Maybe," he said, "but rushing forward with a dying engine and rocks under the surface. That's not bravery, that's suicide. If we're going down, we do it on our terms." Her anger flared, bright and electric. Fear often wears that mask. "Our terms? Their helicopter has guns and missiles. Our boat has life jackets and a cooler that probably doesn't even have soda anymore." He looked at her with aching softness. "Sandy, I need you to listen to me. You've always been braver than you think. You talk about yourself like you're the comic relief, the person who lightens the mood. But I've watched you carry other people's pain for years and still show up kind, still show up gentle. You are not a side character in this story. Not today. We survive this by thinking, not just running." His words hit something deep in her, somewhere beneath the terror and the pain. She had spent so much of her life giving light to others, cast, crew, strangers, that she'd started to believe her own worth was in how much she could make others laugh, how much she could fix. Hearing him speak to the strength she tried to hide shook her. "What's the plan then?" she asked, quieter now. "Because unless you're about to grow wings, I'm not seeing many options." He forced a breath in, focusing. "There's a narrow inlet just ahead on the left," he said, nodding toward a slit in the cliff where dark water swirled. "It's dangerous, but it might be deep enough for us to slip inside. The helicopter can't follow us there. It's too tight. They try, they crash, they'd have to hover outside, and that gives us cover, maybe an escape later." She followed his gaze. The inlet was barely more than a crack, shadowed and ominous, waves slamming into the surrounding rocks with vicious force. It looked like the kind of place you found shipwrecks, not safety. "And if it's not deep enough?" she asked. "Then we hit rock, flip, and swim," he said plainly. "I'd rather fight the ocean than keep playing target practice with a psychopath." Her heart pounded so hard she felt slightly dizzy. The rational part of her screamed that all of these options were terrible. But another part, a wilder, more honest part, recognized the truth. Courage was rarely about having good options. It was about choosing to act anyway when all the options were bad. "Okay," she said, nodding once. "Let's do it." He restarted the engine, coaxing, begging it with soft curses and quiet promises. It responded grudgingly, coughing but catching just enough to move them forward. As they angled toward the inlet, the helicopter reacted, dipping lower, closing in to cut them off. Come on," Keanu whispered, pushing the failing motor as far as it would go. Every vibration felt like a warning that the whole thing could fall apart at any moment. Sandra's eyes darted between the narrowing gap of the inlet and the descending helicopter. They were going to collide in timing if not in space, boat entering the slot just as the machine lined up behind them. The pilot must have realized what they were doing because the chopper shifted, nose angling sharply down. A new sound cut through the air, a different kind of wine. Smaller, sharper, the side door of the helicopter slid open, and for the first time they saw more than a silhouette. A figure leaned out, braced by a harness, lifting something to their shoulder. Sandra's breath caught. It wasn't a missile launcher this time. It was a rifle, long, sleek, brutally precise. "They're not just trying to scare us anymore," she whispered. "They're making sure." Keanu's throat tightened. This was no random attack. This was an execution. He swerved hard toward the inlet, the bow of the boat almost scraping stone as they shot into the shadowed passage. Echoes of the engine bounced off the rock walls, mixing with the crash of wave against stone. The passage was narrower than he'd hoped, the cliffs leaning inward like they wanted to crush the intruders between them. Behind them, the helicopter roared overhead, skimming the cliff tops. The shooter leaned out, struggling to keep a bead on their now partially covered forms as the boat darted into the crack of darkness. Sunlight fractured into shards between the rock, blinding, then plunging them into gloom again. Sandra ducked instinctively as a bullet pinged off the cliff face, sending rock fragments raining down. One sharp piece slashed across her forearm, leaving a hot line of pain and blood. She sucked in breath through her teeth but bit back a scream. She would not give them the satisfaction. "Keep your head down," Keanu called, eyes locked on the jagged path of water ahead. His hands shook on the wheel, not from lack of control, but from the crushing weight of responsibility. If he misjudged by even a foot, he could kill them both. The inlet curved sharply. For a terrifying moment, it looked like a dead end. A sheer wall of rock loomed ahead, black and impenetrable. "This can't be it," Sandra whispered, panic clawing at her throat. "Please tell me this isn't just a stone wall." Keanu's jaw clenched. If the passage ended here, they were done. They'd be sitting ducks, trapped in a stone bowl while the helicopter hovered overhead and took its time. He scanned desperately, searching for any sign of. There, to the right, half hidden by shadow and spray, a narrow, almost invisible turn in the rock. The water funneled through it in a wild, churning rush, barely wide enough for their hull. "There," he said, "hold on to something, and maybe hold on to me." Despite everything, she managed a shaky smile and wrapped her good arm around his waist, pulling herself close as he spun the wheel and gunned the sick engine one more time. The boat shot toward the gap, the roar of the ocean amplifying in the confined space until it sounded like the world was breaking. Overhead, the helicopter engine climbed in pitch as it tried to track them, the shooter repositioning for one clear shot before they disappeared. The boat slammed into the turn, scraping stone, the hull screaming in protest. For one long, unbearable second, it felt like they'd get wedged there, stuck and helpless. Then the bow tipped down into deeper water and they shot through into darkness. Sunlight vanished. Sound shifted. The sea's roar became a muffled echo. They had entered some kind of hidden cavern, the ceiling low, the air cooler. The helicopter's noise dulled, distant now, like a storm rumbling on the other side of the world. The engine coughed twice, then died completely. Silence dropped over them like a heavy blanket. For the first time since the attack began, there were no bullets, no explosions, no engines screaming. Just the gentle slap of water against stone and the sound of their own ragged breathing. Sandra lifted her head slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim. The cavern was vast, a secret cathedral carved by centuries of waves and time. Shafts of light speared down through cracks in the rock above, painting trembling columns on the water. It was strangely beautiful, almost holy, as if they had crashed through chaos and landed in the quiet heart of the earth. She looked at Keanu, stunned, shaking, alive. He looked back just as shaken, and for a few long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then, with her voice barely above a whisper, she said the words she had been carrying for years, the ones that had almost died with her out there on the open sea. "Keanu, if we make it out of this, there's something I've been hiding from you, and I don't know if you'll forgive me when you hear it." The secret in the dark. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, steady beats, each drop echoing through the cavern like a ticking clock. The boat bobbed gently, finally still after all the chaos. For the first time since the attack started, they weren't moving, they weren't dodging, they weren't fighting. They were just there, floating in the dark, breathing hard, alive for reasons that felt dangerously fragile. Keanu's hands still gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, muscles trembling from the adrenaline that had nowhere to go now. His ears rang with phantom echoes of explosions. It took him a full minute before he could even process what Sandra had said. Something she'd been hiding. Something that might cost his forgiveness. In all the years he'd known her, through rumors and headlines and the quiet, tender moments between them, she had never once been cruel to him. Careless sometimes, sure. Human, absolutely. But deliberately hurtful, that wasn't her. Which made the weight in her voice even more unsettling. He turned slowly, really looking at her in the thin shafts of light. Blood streaked her forearm, soaking into the torn fabric of her sleeve. Her hair clung to her cheeks, wet and tangled. Her eyes, usually full of mischief and warmth, were now raw, open, almost ashamed. "You don't have to tell me now," he said softly. "Not here, not with whatever that is still hunting us outside." "I do," she whispered, shaking her head. "Because I almost died out there without you ever knowing, and that feels wrong, cowardly, like I trusted the whole world more than I trusted you." The honesty in that cut him deeper than any bullet could have. He'd spent years wondering what lines he shouldn't cross with her, what feelings he should keep safely locked away to preserve what they had. It hadn't occurred to him that she might be carrying her own locked box of truths. He shifted closer, the boat creaking beneath their combined weight. "Okay," he said gently, "I'm listening." She swallowed, eyes flicking up to the cracks of light above, then back to him. "Do you remember the charity gala in Paris? The one where we snuck out early and ate cheap crepes by the river instead of staying for the fancy dessert?" A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "You mean the night you convinced 3 security guards that we were part of the catering staff so we could escape through the kitchen? Yeah, I remember." "That night," she said, voice wavering, "was the night a studio called my team. They wanted me for a film, a big one. One everyone thought you were going to do until they decided you were too serious now and wanted someone younger, someone more bankable." He frowned. "You never told me about that." "Exactly," she said, pain flashing across her face. "Because I took it. I said yes. I told myself it was just business, that if I didn't do it, someone else would, that it wasn't my job to protect your career from people who didn't deserve you. But what I didn't tell myself was the real reason. I was afraid that if I refused in your name, they'd call me difficult. They'd say, 'She cares more about him than the work.' And then they'd stop calling me." Her voice broke on that last sentence. Keanu felt the cavern tilt a little under the weight of what she was admitting. It wasn't about the role. They had both lost and gained countless roles over the years. It was about what it represented. The moment fear had outweighed loyalty, the moment survival had spoken louder than friendship. He could see it now, the headlines from that year, the whispers about him being too intense, the buzz about her fresh appeal. He'd never connected the dots. He never knew the studio had tried to play them against each other. "I watched the movie," she continued, tears starting to blur her vision. "You congratulated me. You told me I was great. You even made a joke about how you were glad you didn't have to do that ridiculous motorcycle stunt. And I smiled and I thanked you, and I never told you that it was yours first, that they de-dangled your loss as my opportunity, and I let them." She wiped her cheeks, angry with herself. "I hated myself for it, but I was so tired of fighting everyone, of begging studios to see beyond my age, my past, my image. I told myself it was just the system, that we were all trapped in it. But every time you hugged me after that, a little voice kept whispering you betrayed him. He trusted you to be better than the game, and you were." Silence settled heavier than the rock around them. Keanu let the confession wash over him, felt its edges, tested its weight. There was a sting there, of course there was. Not because of the job itself, but because she had carried this alone for so long, too ashamed to share it with him. That hurt more than the choice she'd made. "You think," he said slowly, "that I've never hated myself for taking a role someone else lost? That I've never watched a younger actor miss out because the studio wanted a safer bet, or an older one be quietly pushed aside? This business, it eats people. It makes decent humans do scared, small things just to survive another year. That doesn't make you a monster, it makes you human." Her lip trembled. "So you're not angry?" "I'm angry at them," he said, a rough edge creeping into his voice. I'm angry that they put you in that position. I'm angry that you've been dragging this guilt around like some secret punishment. But at you, he shook his head. No, I'm not angry at you. I'm sad you didn't think I could handle the truth, that you didn't trust that my respect for you could survive your mistakes. The truth of that hit them both. She had spent years preaching kindness, but she hadn't extended it to herself. He had preached forgiveness, but she hadn't believed she deserved his. They had both let fear decide how honest they were allowed to be with each other. Above them, the muffled thud of helicopter rotors returned, closer now. The spell of their moment cracked. Reality shoved its way back in. "They're still out there," Sandra said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "We can't stay here forever." Keanu nodded, the tenderness in his gaze shifting back into focus, into resolve. "We won't," he said. "We just needed one thing first." "What?" "Truth," he said. "You gave me yours, now I owe you mine." She blinked. "What truth?" He opened his mouth to answer. But at that exact moment, a beam of bright, artificial light knifed down through one of the cracks above, sweeping across the cavern like a searching eye. The helicopter had found their hiding place. The light slid toward their small boat, brighter, harsher, until it landed squarely on them, blinding, unforgiving. And as they squinted up into that burning circle, a metallic object dropped from the helicopter, splashing into the water only a few meters away, small, sleek, and blinking with a cold red light. The choice